Hey everyone, it's Jennifer McGuire and thanks again for stopping by. Today I wanted to show you a fun way to get some bold color with a white outline. I love Copic markers, but it's hard to get a white outline and I'll explain it a little bit later. So I'm going to show you a trick to do that today, and it's what I used on the flower here. I'll also talk about other markers you could use for this, and I'll also show how I created that glittery embossing paste background. But let's start with the flower. This is a stamp set from Little Inker Designs. What I really like about the stamp set is it's great for coloring or techniques. So if you like colored pencils, Copics, whatever you like, this is a great stamp set for coloring. And I feel like those are hard to find these days. Now I need to stamp this in a super light ink that works well with Copics, and I'm choosing to use the soft pink ink from Studio Calico. Their inks work well with Copics, they don't bleed, but you could use any soft ink. I just wanted to use this to be sure that it didn't bleed at all on me. Now I have my stamp positioner. I'm using it a little bit differently than you normally use a stamp positioner. I'm going to hold it down and take my paper and put it right into the corner of it. And once I have it there, I'm going to ink up my stamp. I'm using that pink ink from Studio Calico, and watch what I'm going to do. I'm going to first stamp it off once over to the side, and then I'm going to stamp it without re-inking again up into the corner of my Stamp-A-Majig. So this gives me a lighter image than if I wouldn't have stamped it off first, and now I know exactly where this is positioned. So that's a trick that makes this work better. Now you don't need the Stamp-A-Majig, but I really think it helps quite a bit. So let's go ahead and do the coloring. I have this image, it's very light, but it's enough for me to follow and color over. Now I'm putting in the bottom of the screen here which Copics I'm using and which parts, but you could use any Copic markers here. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time making this perfect. I'm just going to go in with a lighter color and then go in and add a little bit of depth with a darker color until I fill the whole flower. Now the reason I am doing the Copic coloring first and the white outline later is that I don't like when my Copic markers touch my embossing powder. I find that sometimes it leaves a residue on my Copic markers and I don't want to ruin them. However, if you have other markers, you can go ahead and first white heat emboss your image and then go in and color it, and the embossing powder will resist the marker as long as it's not a permanent marker like these Copics. So I wanted to use Copics because I have them in a lot of colors and a lot of bold colors, and I can get great blending, but I wanted a white outline, and I'll show you how to do that later. But with Copics, you can't do the white embossing first without taking the chance of ruining the tips of your Copic markers. Now you could, if you had a bigger image that had lots more open area, you could white heat emboss it and then carefully color it in with your Copics and try not to touch it. But with this detailed of an image, I couldn't take the chance with that. Okay, so I'm going to go in and I've done the first part of the flower that I wanted in those red colors, and now I'm going and adding some more red in a different part of the flower. I really just kind of did whatever color I wanted here. I think it'd be fun to do like a rainbow effect, but you really could change this up and get a completely different look each time. I wanted to add some yellow here, and my favorite yellow combination is Y35 with Y38. It's kind of a yellow and an orange that work well together for shading. You can really blend almost any two Copic markers together with enough effort, so I don't really think you need a whole lot of colors. I end up going back to the same colors every time. For pinks, I really like the RV55 and the RV17. I just think it's a nice pink color with some bold kind of richness to it. Now for this, you can see that I'm starting to lose the outline, but that's okay. It's there enough and light enough that I can see it, but I am able to cover it completely. If you need to, you could stamp it in a little bit darker ink, but I think it really is quite easy to do. You can go in and just kind of fill in the areas, and before you know it, you'll see your flower starting to form, and you don't see the outline at all. Now for the outside of the flower, there are little bumps on the outside of the flower, like little scalloped edge. I'm going to skip that part in this image, and I'm just going to cut it off because I didn't want to have to fussy cut that. But you could add some color to those if you wanted to. So now that we've colored our flower with lots of bold color, it's time to add that white outline to it. Again, if you used other markers, you could have done this in the beginning, but I use that Stamp-A-Majig to make this easier. What I'm going to do is stamp the exact same image with Versamark ink. I did not take the stamp off the block. I have it in the same place. I'm going to take my paper, put it right into the corner of my Stamp-A-Majig once again, take that stamp, and I have Versamark ink on it, and I'm going to stamp it right up against the corner. That way I know that my Versamark image is positioned exactly where I stamped originally before I did all the coloring. Now I'm adding some white embossing powder, and I'll zap this with my heat gun, and you'll see I get a nice bright vivid white outline to all that bold coloring. Again, there are other ways you could achieve this look of this bold color with the white outline, but I find that this one gives me the best results. And I'm just going to take my scissors and cut around the outside of the flower, and I'm cutting off those little scallops just to keep the flower simple. Now that we've done our flower, let's go ahead and do the leaves. Now this has a much simpler shape to it, so I don't really feel like I need to use the Stamp-A-Majig. So I'm going to go ahead and stamp the leaves off and then stamp them again so I have a lighter image to color in. And I'm just going to color these pretty quickly with a few different green markers. I'm actually going to use 3 colors here to layer it up. Now you'll see that since this is a simple outline, it'll be really easy for me to go back once I'm done coloring them and stamp right on top of it by eyeballing it and not using a Stamp-A-Majig. Now for the flower that I did before, I used the Stamp-A-Majig just so that I could ensure that I lined it up perfectly. I didn't want to take all that time to color that complicated flower and then not line it up when I went to add the white heat embossing. Now for these leaves, I'm kind of following the pink lines underneath. I can still see them through the green. And I just added some color and went back and added more and more color. So I got these vivid green leaves. So I'm stamping with Versamark ink on top of them and adding some white heat embossing once again. And we end up with that white outline around that really bright coloring. So you can see it was really easy to see through that stamp to quickly stamp on top of it and get the white outline. So now that I have my leaves done, I'm just going to go ahead and cut them out quickly, and then we can add this to the card. However, I decided I wanted to add something a little bit interesting to the background instead of leaving it plain. So I decided to use my stencils. I'm addicted to stencils and embossing paste, especially when I add a little bit of shimmer to it. So I'm going to show you how I did that. I'm taking some painter's tape, which is one of my new favorite tools, and taking some white paper and taping it onto my work surface so that the paper doesn't shift when I use this stencil and embossing paste. This stencil is a new one from Memory Box. I love, love, love the detail of this stencil. I think this is fantastic, and it works with a lot of styles of cards. Making sure I have this down enough so I have room for my stamped greeting in the end. Taking some painter's tape and just adhering this down. Since you see that this stencil's got lots of pieces to it that are kind of loose, what I'm going to do is tape this down as much as I can, all around the edges. And the painter's tape is inexpensive and easy to remove, so I don't feel bad if I kind of go crazy taping this down because I have a huge roll of it. Now after I've covered all sides of this, I'm going to add some embossing paste. Now the embossing paste that I like is from Wendy Vecchi. It's one you see here. It's the white. It's my favorite by far of all the different pastes. I'm going to scoop some out with my little tool here, and I'm going to go kind of with the grain here. I'm going from up down because I don't want to accidentally push up some of those curved lines of the stencil. So I'm just going to keep going in the same direction and scrape away until I get a smooth surface. I like my embossing paste put on thin and smooth, basically even along the height of the stencil, but you can put it on however you want. You want to put the lid on it quickly and clean off your tool pretty quickly, and then you can peel off your stencil, and you'll want to wash that under warm water so that the paste doesn't dry on the stencil, or dunk it into a bowl of water until you have time to clean it later on. So now while this paste is still wet, I'm going to take some iridescent sparkle embossing powder and add it to this. Since the paste is wet, it'll hold on to the powder long enough for us to zap it with a heat gun so that we end up with a sparkly looking embossing paste. You can use any kind of embossing powder on top of paste. Now I prefer to leave the paste to dry for a few minutes before I add heat to it so that it doesn't cause it to bubble. But you get this great bit of texture that's soft, it doesn't crack off or anything, and it has that shimmer to it. So now it's time to pull our card together. I'm just going to put lots of adhesive on the back of this. I kind of went overboard there. You didn't need that much adhesive, but since there's going to be a lot of weight on the front of this card, I wanted to make sure that it didn't come off. I could have put the embossing paste directly onto the note card that I had created here, but I wasn't real sure where I was going with it at the time, if I was going to make it a vertical or horizontal card. Now I have a piece of green scrap paper here that I've cut into a thin strip. I'm going to put some adhesive on the back of this, and this just gives a defined edge between the area where we have the embossing paste and the flat area where we'll do our stamping. And I'll just use my trimmer or my scissors to cut off the pieces that hang off the side. Now I'm using some foam tape to add my little flower on top here. I really think it makes a big difference to kind of pop this up, especially since we'll have some dimension under part of this flower because of the embossing paste. And then I wanted to stamp my greeting before I added the leaves so I could make sure that I had enough room for the greeting. This stamp set is from Technique Tuesday. I just love this little hello greeting. I think he's awfully cute and works on all different kinds of cards. It's a good size. So I'm going to stamp that there, and I can use one of those other messages that you see on that stamp set on the inside of the card too. So now that I have my gradient, it's time to tuck my little leaves in place, and I ended up making 3 of the leaves, and I'll have them coming out from different areas from behind the flower. So although we went really bold with these flowers and leaves, I kept the background simple by using white with a bit of texture and a black stamped image. I think it just gives a nice contrast and keeps the card pretty clean and simple. So there you have one way to achieve a white outline on Copic coloring. There are many ways to do it, but I think this one gives me the best results, and hopefully it works for you too. If you're interested in any of the products, please look below in my YouTube description. Also be sure to head over to my blog at jennifermcguireinc.com. You can click here where I'll be giving away one of these stamp sets. Thanks so much for watching.